The following video will be on the etymology and standards and naming practices for round metal balls. Whether they're ball bearings or buckshot or birdshot, doesn't matter. We're going to be touching on this because of the rather oddly recent advancements to this. We're going to go back to the before time, but I'm going to cover something called Swan shot. And this will start an argument or it won't. 27 caliber, 26.6 caliber, 24 caliber, or any other caliber or diameter, it's 0.24 inches to 0.27 inches, buckshot was called swan shot. And it wasn't done by any other method other than casting it in most cases. Not all, but most. It is not tailed, teardrop, heart-shaped, or dimpled shot most of the time, or at all, even by attempting to weasel it into being. Because it was for hitting swans. Drip shot is different than swan shot. Here we go. Let's say you take some molten lead that you've smelted from raw ore. It's going to have other metals mixed with it. Lead bonds with all sorts of crap. Usually lowers its melting temperature. One of the tricks to smelting it at one time would be to run batch after batch into progressively larger containers and let it sit longer, which made it more expensive, but lead atoms would sink to the bottom while the other elements might boil to the top. You could put in various adulterants to separate them, to bond them out. Yes or no? Now, I'm not talking about smelting modern or smelting ancient. I mean over time, the various methods. Now, one of the things that would be done would be to skim off the top layer, which would be lighter metals or materials, garbage, dirt, rocks, sticks, char, coal, and then pour it over a screen or a sieve or a colander or filter of some kind to get out the larger items that wouldn't melt at such a low temperature. The more metals you mix together, the lower the melting point usually, but not always gets, and it's almost always below the highest melting point of one of the elements. That means that if you let it sit there long enough, the bottom would start to solidify before the top, not because of temperature gradient, but because it was becoming purer and purer lead, because it's heavier. The skimming stuff would be poured through something to capture whatever was in there to try to salvage it or separate it out so you'd get purer material down here and then just reprocess it or leave it as is. Now, to make it more convenient so you could keep sieving, it would be poured into water because low temperature metals can be dropped into water. Just get it away from the cook pot. Then you'd separate it by size by running it through, again, screens or sieves or colanders, filtering from large holes on top, number 1 filter, or number 0, to smaller and smaller sizes. This will be done during lead smelting. Aught, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 buckshot, or birdshot, going the same way. That's not actually the origin story for it, but think of it as a rational way of saying, well, it went through sieve number 1. Now, everything in sieve number 1 fall through, on top of it would be the stuff too big. Well, what size are they? Well, we can run it through retroactively and make it aught, double aught, triple aught. The same kind of things happens if you label it A through B or Z. Or not. So now we have a hint of why people would look at this and think, okay, it kind of makes sense if you do it like that, but not all of it matches. Why? We'll get to that in a minute. But this is offshoot and cast-off material from lead smelting, and it would be sieved. And stuff that would form wires instead of forming round balls would be lower grade because it's easier to pour a solid from a flask if it's a bunch of round pellets, or at least round-ish. You could weigh it that way and get it pretty close. And if they were very consistent, you could even count the number of pellets per pound or per ounce. Hint? Steel can also be done the same thing. I have personally made very small steel ball bearings. It's a method by getting steel wire and heating it in a blowtorch and making it form droplets by surface tension. But that's steel wire used for electrical equipment. It's a specific amalgam or alloy. Lead can form alloys that tend to form spheres much more tightly or easily, or you can use it with a flux. Various kinds were come up with. But again, after lead smelting, it would be poured into sheets or pigs or shapes. for lead pipes for water or sewer. Yes, water. Now, making it into sheet, the lead could be cut into strips or whatever for a roof or whatever, but you could also cut it into strips that were the same width as how thick it was, and then chop those into little bits and make them round balls or shot. People would look at science information like, oh, aerodynamics is important, we should make things teardrop shaped, slipstreamed, fins on the back of a car. That's not science, that's marketing. Pseudoscience. Back at the same time, people would notice that some of the shot would do a better job taking out a bird and was round because it hit a certain way, and the other stuff would hit a different way and do better for certain things. Also, larger diameter lead is heavier, retains energy further, and will go through more material. If you're trying to take out a bird, you only want to knock it down. You don't want to use bigger shot necessarily. Yes, we're getting to why things were called certain things. Now, I'm using that description for cutting lead from a 1980 reference to a bunch of works I can't locate. I'll get to the rant about disappearing data later. But anyway, 1665, molten lead being poured through a sieve so it'd try to form droplets of consistent sizes before it fell from like a ladle, a hole, or a spout. It would be poured through this sieve and become higher grade ovoid or oval or perfectly round shot. It usually had a dimple because it would pinch on one side as it would hit water or whatever material we were dropping it into. Maybe it was mud, maybe it was sea foam, whatever. This is called Rupert shot. Now, this was a slightly improved method by doing the same thing. Again, if you took off the sieve off the top of the molten lead and poured it through a sieve, the droplets sometimes would form certain sizes more often. By sorting it, you got a good grading, but again, all that wire and crap, that wouldn't go through. Well, you'd remelt it, or you'd just sell it as is, and people would use it for whatever. Most of the time, just melt it down for something else, or sometimes use it straight up as shot. It was cheap for your musket. 1740, John Harrison invented roller bearings in a cage for a clock. This is a high precision requirement. That means by 1740, from 1665, we have examples of people making machinery that can make really smooth, precise, round ball bearings for limited use at that point, but he eventually got better at it. But what were they using up to that point for lead? Because it melts at a lower temperature, you just mix it with arsenic to pour it through the sieve. That's what Rupert shot did. It caused the outside layer of it to react to the gases around it, form a round ball, and aerodynamically form a sphere rather than a teardrop, which might indicate that a round ball is a little bit better than a teardrop shape. Teardrop shapes have to be oriented a certain way to be efficient. If they're not, if they're going sideways, they won't. If that's what you want to do, you can limit the distance. Maybe cutting force. Pennsylvania Gazette, 1765, had ads for Swan shot to make, listed as 24 caliber, number 3 cast buckshot. And the molds, gang molds for it, for sale. Swan shot was buckshot. And if you cut off the sprue, some works would talk about that, making it teardrop-ish. A gang mold, you'd pour lead into a cut in the top, and it would focus the lead into the little holes going into each of the round ball molds. The hole had to be big enough for the air to come out. The smaller the shot, the harder it is to get that little hole to work. Sometimes they'd have another hole further up to where it would vent air, and you'd end up with 2 spikes. If you clipped it off right next to the ball, you end up with a nice round ball. If you didn't care, or if you didn't want to futz around with remelting that bar with those little bits, which sometimes oxidized and wasted lead, you'd leave it on it. It would also hold and lock it together when you packed it into your gun to where you could just pack it down. That's a tail, but those are sprues. And again, that is not Swan shot. 1769, dropped shot pouring molten lead through screens at various heights. This is another addition, through high towers. Due to surface tension, the air itself would cause a near sphere as they fell. And it didn't require you add any additives, but you could, making the tower shorter. Philip Vaughan patented carriage ball bearings and races 1794. 1792 and 1791, common shot had various names based on numbers or usage. Patented or milled shot that was high-grade, highfalutin, snooty shit would have names for what you would use it on based on ballistics and usefulness. Buckshot is for shooting deer. Turkey shot is for turkeys. Pigeon shot existed. There's snake shot. That's a retronym. Here we go. Where did the BB come from? 1792 is the earliest reference anybody could find, and they don't have the references anymore. Here we go. 60 molded pellets cast per ounce. William, I can't pronounce it, British Sportsman, Nobleman, and Gentleman and Farmer's Dictionary, page 600. I actually got a screenshot. That's a book written in 1792 about something that had been reprocessed for 130 years by this point. 131 of evolution. And now we have the designation BB showing up. The B designation doesn't have an origin story. It's just birdshot. Let's continue. 1821. Now we're in the modern year. Shot size tables listed 26.6 caliber or .266 inches as swan shot. Goose was 23.1 caliber. And 20.7 or 21 caliber was duck shot. Ezekiel Baker's, not Bankers or Barker, Ezekiel Baker's remarks on rifle or rifles. 1835 listed a reproduction of it from a source. I can't find the book to check it, so that's the best we can do. And that's repeated in several other works, but that's the most common one, and again, I can find a link to it. 1961, Lewis W. Blymaster, a person who might still be alive. Small size lead shot process of the following. You might see this on YouTube. I'll link to it. Metering out molten lead dripping from a small orifice approximately an inch above something, like hot water or an incline covered with something hot. This would drop from there about 3 feet into water or various other distances into another material. The current one is to use soap for the water because it causes a surface tension effect that makes them much more round. And they use a heating pan, it's a frying pan, with a metal plate in front of it made out of aluminum, covered with PAM or something else as a nonstick surface at a slightly lower temperature than the pan is, and it drops on it and falls into the water. And it's mesmerizing watching molten lead be made into pellets that way. Now, it makes really small shot, just like the Bielmeister, I can't pronounce his name, method, but you can do it at home. It's a frying pan with holes in it and little spouts. Many sizes of shot are named for what they were appropriate for. Buck, deer, moose, caribou. Doe shot doesn't exist. They just do buck. Turkey for T. F for fowl. B for bird. Was BB Big Bird or ball bearing or baseline or bulleted breech percussion cap cartridge by Flaubert? No, it wasn't. LG in Britain and all of the other names like LG for large grape or large goose. MG for medium grape and medium goose. SG for small goose and small swan, or then we get 27 caliber number 2 cast buckshot called Swan drops rather than shot, page 97 of a book done in 1947, and the things get worse and worse and worse. Swans are hunted along with other waterfowl and wildfowl in a few U.S. states and in Arctic regions around the world and in other countries in general. Swans are rarely hunted in most Western countries, however, due to hunting regulations, like in the UK, where it's a royal prerogative to do so and property of the Queen, and illegal, and she never did this, apparently. We don't have rat shot labeled R, S for snake shot, and M for moth shot, but there was a moth shot. It's dust. To review, the game of telephone gets broken up by books being deleted or put under copyright barrier when they were never supposed to be copyrighted. Again, you can't recopyright it on behalf of something from 1660s. Next, most of these are under patent mentions that I look up, but again, those are behind paywalls. The rant will end on that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. Swan shot is not the same as drip shot. And all these names are based on what they were used for or random statements like the size of the colander.